Pretend you're sick. Leave now. My 10-year-old granddaughter passed me under the dinner table, written on a crumpled napkin. My heart stopped. Looking up, I saw her hands trembling as my wealthy, charming fiancé poured wine for his adult children. Everyone was smiling, but my granddaughter's face was ghost white, her eyes screaming a warning. She was too terrified to speak out loud. Trusting her instinct, I faked a sudden, violent migraine, apologized to the table, and made my exit. 10 minutes later, as I sat shivering in my car 2 blocks away, my phone buzzed with an automated alert from my home security app. I tapped the screen, and what I saw on the live camera feed chilled me to the bone. My dream life was a lie, and if I hadn't listened to a 10-year-old's secret note, I would never have made it out alive. My name is Clara Vance, and at 28 years old, I found myself sitting at the head of a massive empire I never truly wanted to run alone. When my father passed away suddenly 8 months ago, he left the majority control of Vance Logistics, our family's multi-million-dollar regional transportation firm, to me. He believed in my vision, my degree in supply chain management, and my steady hand. But his decision left a festering wound in the heart of my 38-year-old stepbrother, Julian. Julian had spent his entire adult life assuming the company throne would automatically fall to him. To him, I wasn't his sister. I was an unqualified placeholder sitting in his chair. Over the months, the tension between us had grown thick enough to cut with a knife, subtle passive aggression masking a deep, bitter resentment. That humid Friday evening, however, Julian was all smiles. He had organized an intimate celebration at L'Auberge, the city's most prestigious fine dining establishment, claiming we were celebrating a major prospective client contract he had spent weeks negotiating. The private dining room was suffocatingly elegant, polished oak panels, gleaming crystal stemware, and heavy velvet curtains that muffled the noise of the city outside. Beside Julian sat his wife, Beatrice, draped in designer silk and wearing a smile that never quite reached her sharp blue eyes. And then there was little Lily. At 8 years old, my step-niece was a gentle, quiet child who spent most family dinners drawing silently in her sketchbook. She sat right next to me at the long mahogany table, her tiny knees tucked up against her chair, her wide brown eyes darting anxiously between her father, her mother, and me. I leaned over, nudged her shoulder playfully, and whispered, "Having fun, kiddo?" Lily didn't smile back. She just swallowed hard, her small fingers clutching her cloth napkin so tightly her knuckles turned white. The waiter poured the main course wine, the dark red liquid catching the dim candlelight. Julian stood up, tapping his glass with a silver fork to command the room. "I'd like to propose a toast," Julian announced, his voice smooth, carrying that polished executive authority he practiced in front of mirrors. "To family and to navigating difficult transitions." His sharp eyes drifted toward me, glinting with something cold beneath his theatrical smile. As many of you know, taking over Vance Logistics hasn't been easy on poor Clara. The stress, the long hours, it's clearly taking a toll on her focus lately. But tonight, we celebrate. A subtle murmur ran through the small table. Beatrice gave a soft, pitying sigh, patting my forearm with ice-cold fingers. "We're just so worried about your health, Clara," she murmured under her breath, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You've seemed so scatterbrained recently." I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. Before I could respond, I felt a sharp nudge against my knee beneath the heavy tablecloth. I looked down. 8-year-old Lily was staring straight ahead, pretending to doodle on her menu, but her small left hand was sliding something secretly across my lap. It was a folded cloth napkin. I discreetly opened it in my lap. Scrawled hastily and wobbly, frantic blue crayon was a message. "Pretend you're sick. Leave now." My heart took a violent leap into my throat. I glanced up from the napkin. Across the table, Julian and Beatrice weren't looking at me. They were staring intensely at my untouched wine glass, exchanging a swift, triumphant nod that sent a chill straight down my spine. I didn't hesitate. I dropped my fork onto the plate with a loud clatter, placed a trembling hand over my stomach, and let out a soft gasp. "Clara, are you all right?" Julian asked, his voice dripping with synthetic concern. I'm so sorry," I stammered, standing up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. A sudden migraine, my stomach. I need to get home. Ignoring their fake protests, I grabbed my coat and purse, turned on my heel, and walked out into the cool night air as fast as my feet could carry me. 10 minutes later, I was sitting inside my sedan in the dimly lit corner of the restaurant parking garage. The rain was pounding hard against the windshield, but the cold sweat dripping down my back had nothing to do with the weather. My hands were shaking so violently against the leather steering wheel that I could barely hold my breath. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a notification from my iPad's messaging app, an alert from Lily's child-safe account, connected to the restaurant's public Wi-Fi. My eyes scanned the frantic, typos-riddled text. Clara, please look in your coat pocket right now. They put something in your glass when you went to the bathroom earlier. And they put something inside your purse. A terrifying rush of adrenaline hit my chest. With trembling fingers, I reached into the deep right pocket of my wool coat. My fingertips brushed against hard plastic. I pulled it out, a small, unlabeled amber pill bottle packed with heavy prescription sedatives I had never seen in my life, let alone been prescribed. Heart hammering against my ribs, I unzipped the main compartment of my leather handbag and emptied the contents onto the passenger seat. Hidden deep within the silk lining fold was a sleek, silver USB flash drive. I sat back in the dark cabin, staring at the bottle and the drive in utter horror. Julian and Beatrice weren't just hosting a celebratory dinner to patronize me. They were staging a crime scene. They had planned to drug my wine, plant controlled substances in my pockets, and trigger a public, embarrassing meltdown, creating the exact narrative they needed to prove I was mentally unfit, unstable, and a danger to the family empire. I put the car in drive and tore out of that parking garage, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. My heart was hammering a relentless rhythm against my ribs as I drove straight toward Midtown Sacramento. There was only one person I knew I could trust with my life: Richard Hayes, my late father's longtime personal attorney and my most trusted corporate mentor. When I burst into his high-rise office building 20 minutes later, soaked from the rain and clutching my bag like a lifeline, Richard took one look at my pale face and immediately ushered me into his private study, locking the heavy mahogany door behind us. Clara, slow down. What happened? Richard asked, his voice calm and grounding as he handed me a glass of water. Without a word, I set the unlabeled prescription bottle and the silver USB drive onto his dark glass desk. Plug it in, Richard, I whispered, my voice trembling. Please. He plugged the drive into his encrypted laptop. A single folder popped up, containing drafted legal motions stamped with today's date. As Richard scrolled through the documents, his face drained of all color, his jaw tightening into a hard, rigid line. They weren't just trying to humiliate me. Julian and Beatrice had drafted an emergency petition for temporary guardianship and corporate receivership over Vance Logistics. The paperwork alleged that I suffered from severe, unmanaged substance dependency and cognitive instability, citing a prearranged medical assessment signed off by a corrupt private physician whom Julian had bribed. The strategy was chillingly clear. Tonight's staged public breakdown was meant to be the final piece of evidence. Tomorrow morning at the emergency board meeting, Julian was going to present these documents, strip me of my voting rights, and seize total control of the company forever. A cold, calculating stillness washed over me. For months, I had played the quiet, agreeable younger sister, absorbing Julian's passive-aggressive insults and taking the high road. But as I stared at those fraudulent legal petitions, the fear in my chest hardened into something sharp and unyielding. We don't confront them tonight, I told Richard, my voice steadier than it had been all evening. If we attack now, they'll claim it's a misunderstanding and destroy the evidence. We let them think their trap worked. Instead of going home, Richard drove me directly to a private medical clinic downtown. Under an assumed name, I had a comprehensive toxicology panel drawn and sealed by an independent chief medical officer. The blood work proved definitively that my system was 100% clean, completely free of any alcohol, narcotics, or sedatives. While I waited at the clinic, Richard went to work behind the scenes. Using his legal authority, he contacted the management at Lauberge. Threatened with a massive corporate lawsuit and potential evidence destruction charges, the restaurant security chief handed over the high-definition surveillance footage from our private dining room. The video was damning. Clear as day, while I had stepped away to the restroom during appetizers, Beatrice had leaned over my seat, pulled a tiny glass vial from her designer clutch, and dropped 3 clear liquid drops straight into my untouched wine glass. Later that night, a short, encrypted voice memo arrived on my phone from Lily's iPad. In a tearful whisper, my 8-year-old step-niece revealed that she had overheard her parents in the kitchen earlier that afternoon, laughing about finally getting Clara out of the way for good so they could take what was rightfully theirs. They thought they were dealing with a naive 28-year-old girl who would crumble under pressure. They had no idea I was about to walk into their trap and spring one of my own. At 10 o'clock sharp the next morning, the grand executive boardroom of Vance Logistics was filled with tension. Julian sat at the head of the long conference table, flanked by Beatrice and his legal team. He wore a crisp, tailored suit and a look of practiced somberness, holding a thick leather folder. The board members sat in silence, looking anxious and confused as Julian cleared his throat to begin his performance. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Julian said, his voice laced with rehearsed tragedy. "It breaks my heart to deliver this news, but last night at dinner, my sister Clara suffered a severe, tragic relapse. Her ongoing struggles with substance dependency and mental instability have reached a crisis point. For the safety of this company and her own well-being, I am officially petitioning for emergency control of Vance Logistics." He smiled faintly, preparing to distribute the forged medical papers, until the heavy double doors at the back of the room burst open. The room fell dead silent. I walked inside, wearing a sharp charcoal blazer, my head held high, flanked by Richard Hayes and 2 uniformed police officers. Julian's face went instantly pale, his jaw dropping as if he were staring at a ghost. "Clara? What is the meaning of this?" he stammered, scrambling to cover his paperwork. "I'm here to run my meeting, Julian," I said calmly, taking my rightful place at the head of the table. Before he could speak, Richard stepped forward and projected 3 things onto the wall screen: the certified medical report proving my blood was completely clean, the crystal-clear restaurant security footage showing Beatrice poisoning my wine, and the decrypted USB files revealing Julian's corporate fraud. Gasps echoed around the table. Beatrice let out a sharp, terrified shriek, while Julian collapsed back into his chair, his arrogant facade completely crumbling into dust as the officers stepped forward and clicked handcuffs onto his wrists. 3 weeks after that explosive morning in the boardroom, the dust finally began to settle. Julian and Beatrice were officially indicted on multiple felony charges, including corporate fraud, attempted poisoning, and conspiracy. Deprived of the fortune they had tried so ruthlessly to steal, their high-end lifestyle completely unraveled, leaving them to face the harsh reality of the justice system. With Julian out of the picture, I formally assumed full executive authority as CEO of Vance Logistics. One of my very first official acts was establishing a legally protected educational trust fund for Lily, ensuring that her future, her education, and her well-being would be fully secured and entirely untouched by her parents' debts. She was only 8 years old, but her courage, her quick thinking, and a tiny wobbly note written on a cloth napkin had changed everything. She hadn't just saved my career, she had saved my life. Now, as I sit in my father's old office looking out over the city, I'm reminded that true power isn't about arrogance or manipulation. It's about standing strong, staying sharp, and protecting the people who stand by you when the shadows close in. I want to hear from you now. What would you have done if you found yourself in my shoes that night at the restaurant? Would you have left immediately, or confronted them right then and there? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click one of the videos popping up on your screen right now for another mind-blowing tale. Thank you for watching.